let's go ahead and get things started. We do got a lot of ground to cover today. Again, my name is Jason Kropp. I am a technical marketing engineer over here at Peplink, and it is my honor today to go ahead and walk through our Peplink Certification Engineer Bootcamp. We are breaking things up into 2 sessions. Today's session is going to cover SpeedFusion and SD-WAN applications. Our goal is to give everybody a good working knowledge of how the application works, and then to be able to go ahead and certainly rock it out on the PCE exam for those particular parts. Next week, we'll be covering In Control 2, product families, and pick up the remainders. Just to kind of go over today's itinerary, we'll just do a quick intro. We'll talk about the PCE exam itself, and then go into the broad strokes of both an SD-WAN and SpeedFusion. Then we'll go through configuration, both through the UI as well as In Control 2, and then some tips and tricks, recommendations, wrap it up with a QA. So, what is the PCE? At its most basic level, all of our partners, engineers, etc., need to understand implicitly how the Peplink ecosystem works, and that's all the way from pre-sales recommendations, getting things installed, questions that may arise, as well as troubleshooting skills if the unfortunate does crop up. What the Peplink Certification Engineer exam gives is it gives you all the tools needed to answer those questions that come up all the way from soup to nuts. In and of itself, the PCE exam is an open book test. It has a pool of about 130 questions that are going to test your knowledge all the way across. Products, features, the tech, how to get them up and running, how to troubleshoot them, etc. Now, before you just go ahead and dive straight into the exam, we have a number of training materials available to review to make sure that you got what you need to take care of business. And during the exam, again, this is open book. You are free to use whatever resources you have available to you. The website, the form, taking notes from this, etc. during the exam. We have 2 tracks available currently through PCE. There's the tech side and the sales side. Today we're going to be talking about the tech side. Now, once you go ahead and decide to get ready and take advantage of our fee waive today, we've got 2 ways to go about it. Number 1, if you have already been certified and let things lapse, this is a great way to get back under coverage. Just head over to training.peplink.com. Go ahead and choose Peplink Certified Engineer in the course. Make sure that you're taking PCE 3.0. That's our latest and greatest, and that's what everything is based on today. And then just go ahead and hit that begin exam. You've got 100 minutes to get things done. Now, if you are doing this for the first time, or you just don't remember if you have or not, we'll basically put you into the new user group. And it's much the same path, only this time you have to create your account, decide that you're taking PCE 3.0, and then go ahead and get started. You again have 100 minutes to get things taken care of. Well, let's get to it. What is SD-WAN? And let's face it, today, business, the way it works is changing. Decentralization is more the norm. Working abroad, whether telecommuting or the like, that's the new normal. IT systems have got to evolve with everything, and we've migrated towards SD-WAN, or software-defined wide area networks, is the answer to it. And the reason is that, at its most basic level, SD-WANs bring unparalleled agility and cost saving to your network. The architecture can connect your branches and data centers, optimizing performance, and we do this for about 1/3 of the cost of the more expensive solutions out there. Let's compare and contrast what we're talking about. In a traditional WAN, of course, reliability can be difficult because you're primarily married to one particular WAN or another, depending on a session-by-session basis. This means you're pretty inflexible, pretty non-scalable, and that if you've got to go in and make changes across the board, you've got to go in and individually touch all the routers. On an SD-WAN, it's the exact opposite. We have that reliability at about a third of the cost. You have the ability to aggregate or bond these connections together to make something greater than the sum of its parts. Extremely scalable, whether up or down, as you add or take away WAN connections based on business needs. And we do have the ability to centrally manage things from the cloud. What do I mean by consolidation? An SD-WAN router can take over or replace a number of pieces of equipment that are currently on your network. Your standard load balancer, a VPN termination point, the WAN optimizer, just a straight up router, or firewalls, all can be replaced by an SD-WAN router. An SD-WAN router is cloud optimized. In the example here, you see our Fusion Hub, which is our virtual SpeedFusion termination point, having the ability to be deployed on any of the major cloud platforms on the market, Azure, AWS, GCE, and we can do this all over the world quickly. SD-WAN routers should be able to give you a lightweight replacement for the traditional approach to networking, and we have the ability to take an internet connection regardless of the transport tech. Meaning basically if it has a handoff that the SD-WAN router can take, it shouldn't matter what that delivery mechanism is. Peplink routers are built with exactly that thought in mind. We give you the ability to make an SD-WAN to make SpeedFusion from multiple technologies, MPLS, fiber, DSL, cellular, Wi-Fi. Pretty much if it's got the handoff, we can take it. An SD-WAN solution has to provide a secure VPN and have the ability to scale network services, basically meaning we got to break out for non-important traffic just straight through the edge router, automatic secure routing between all your various business locations, and have the ability to set up application priority and optimization as necessary. Peplink solutions do exactly that. SpeedFusion gives you that secure VPN access, 256-bit AES, military-grade access to all the cloud resources anywhere in the world that you have a location to. An SD-WAN solution should make things simple, again, at its most basic level, reducing the complexity of management, configuration, and just the flat-out setup of all the WANs on the network. What does this mean? This means failover seamlessly, using the best mix of internet connections at any given location. Again, doesn't matter if it's public or a private, and to be able to optimize that performance between the locations. With our cloud-based management platform in Control 2, admins are going to have full control over their network from that cloud-based interface. You have the ability for zero-touch configuration, the ability to deploy firewall rules, the ability for traffic steering. There's a lot you can do from IC2. And then based on rules that you set up within the router, an SD-WAN solution should allow for multi-WAN load balancing efficiently and dynamically. Again, what this means is once traffic hits the router based on rules that you have in play, the box should be able to route it through the best available internet connection that it has to it. Peplink absolutely does that with Outbound Policy, our traffic steering suite. We actively monitor all available WAN connections that are tasked to the box via health check, make intelligent decisions to route that application flow based on the rules you put into play. It really is a set it and forget it kind of device. So why are we now suddenly calling things an SD-WAN? Well, Gartner, kind of the gold standard of network oversight in the marketplace today, Peplink has been doing this for about a decade. And SD-WAN is the first standard industry-wide term that neatly describes what we've been doing. And when we use SD-WAN, it can make things a bit easier to explain to the end users on what our capabilities are. It's useful to avoid confusion, of course, with your traditional server-based load balancing products. And SD-WAN is not going to suddenly replace any terms that we currently use, but it's kind of a way to sidestep or explain again what we mean. So let's go into some of the questions from the PCE based on SD-WAN. So with our first question here, please select the correct statement that explains the SD-WAN feature secure VPN. Peplink routers enable you to build one logical WAN using multiple tech. Using IC2, network admins gain full control over their networks using a single interface. Using SpeedFusion VPN technology, branch offices gain secure local network access to cloud resources. Or Peplink routers actively monitor WAN quality and make intelligent decisions to direct the application flow. I'll give you a couple of moments here to throw your answers into the chat. And if you answered C, you're absolutely right. Using SpeedFusion VPN technology, branch offices gain secure local network access to the cloud. Good job, everybody. Next up, please select the correct statement that explains the SD-WAN feature, WAN virtualization. Peplink routers enable you to build one logical WAN using multiple tech. Using IC2, network admins gain full control over their networks with a single interface. Using SpeedFusion VPN tech, branch offices gain secure local network access to the cloud. Or Peplink routers actively monitor WAN quality and make intelligent decisions to direct application flow. Again, I'll give you a moment or two to put this into the chat. And if you answered A, give yourself a gold star. WAN virtualization means Peplink routers enable you to build one logical WAN connection using multiple technologies: DSL, MPLS, cellular, fiber. Again, it doesn't matter the handoff to the Peplink device. As long as we can take that handoff, we can integrate it into SpeedFusion. And then finally, please select the correct statement that explains the SD-WAN feature intelligently managed. Again, routers enable you to build a logical WAN using multiple tech. IC2 gives you network administrators full control over the networks from a single interface. SpeedFusion gives you access to the cloud. Or Peplink routers actively monitor WAN quality and make intelligent decisions to direct application flow. Answers is D. You answered, you're doing pretty good. Peplink routers actively monitor WAN quality and make intelligent decisions to direct application traffic flow. The heart of the message is once you have the Peplink set up and running, it will go ahead and execute your traffic routing based on the rules you put into play. Set it and forget it. Well, let's go into SpeedFusion directly. First off, kind of the concepts, the higher view of things. SpeedFusion is Peplink's patented SD-WAN tech that creates a point-to-point VPN between at least two Peplink or PepWave devices, virtual or physical, using all available WAN connections that are tasked to the tunnel. Benefits from this, of course, is military-grade encryption. 256-bit AES military grade is going to encapsulate and protect your data from point A to point B. You do have the ability for aggregated speed, even for a single user or a session. We are able to go ahead and shift and keep persistence on a per session basis, which is what our third one is, even if you lose one of the WANs in the tunnel. Requirements to set up SpeedFusion. Now, as I said, you do need at least 2 SpeedFusion capable units minimum. Now, different models can create different levels of PepVPN or SpeedFusion based on where you want to deploy, and we'll get into that in a moment. The other main requirement is that you do need a public IP on at least one of the WAN connections in play. Now, if that public IP is not a static IP, just register it with one of our supported DNS services, of which we do now do things through Control 2 as well, and we can create SpeedFusion to the WAN DNS hostname. SpeedFusion does have multiple configuration types, both point-to-point as well as a full mesh, as well as multiple deployment methods. We can deploy SpeedFusion manually through the UI or from the cloud from Control 2 with our zero-touch configuration options. Here's how it works. Sessions get encrypted and broken up into packets, and then those packets get sent across all available WAN connections that are in the tunnel. These packets hit the other side on the WAN, are decrypted, reassembled into the session at the remote Peplink device. Now, the benefit of this is that both transmission and reception, the two in the from, are done at the speed of all WAN links combined, minus a little bit for the overhead on the VPN, and we'll get into that in a bit. Security focused. SpeedFusion is established through Diffie-Hellman key exchange protocol that uses public key cryptography. What we're doing is we are exchanging and renegotiating those keys on both ends of the tunnel at random intervals. Therefore, data that goes through gets AES cryptographic algorithm protection at the 256-bit security level. So because this is always a moving target, it's highly unlikely that somebody is going to defeat SpeedFusion security. On top of that, if by some quirk of fate that does occur, because the session is broken up on the packet level and sent across all available WANs, it's junk data that they're seeing, incomplete sessions. So security is paramount with SpeedFusion. SpeedFusion to establish uses TCP ports 32015 and UDP 4500 to establish the tunnel and send data. Now, if on one of the endpoints that you're attempting to bring into SpeedFusion does have an IPsec tunnel or L2TP with IPsec up and running, then UDP 4500, of course, isn't available for them to use. SpeedFusion is going to use the next available port, which would normally be UDP 32015. You can also go ahead and assign a custom port to the handshake, and that's just anywhere again from 1 to 65,535. Now, when you use multiple tunnels between both locations, UDP data ports are sequential, so it'd be UDP 4500, 4501, etc., etc. SpeedFusion, as I said, can be deployed at a number of levels. Where everything begins is at PepVPN. Think of it as basically an IPsec analog, but a lot simpler to get up and running, and uses a full SpeedFusion engine for seamless integration. Next up is hot failover or session persistence. What this allows you to do is to keep a session up and running, going from one WAN to another within the SpeedFusion tunnel, keeping the session intact. So if you do have a WAN dropout, a flaky cell, whatever, you're not going to lose the session if you deploy with hot failover. Next up is WAN smoothing. This is the consistency angle of SpeedFusion, where we're using multiple WAN connections to create a single jitter-free stream. Basically, what this means is we're sending redundant data that can be integrated into the session based on a packet drop. And then finally, bandwidth bonding. This is where you're looking for that raw horsepower, adding up the speed of all of your connections together into something greater than the sum of its parts. Hot failover, again, is reliability is what you are more so looking for. If a WAN does drop out, you do not drop the session, even for things like VoIP calls, video streams, what have you. Branch connectivity, long distance Ethernet, POS devices, all of these can be take great advantage of hot failover. How it works is, again, you are establishing the VPN on all available internet connections that you have in the tunnel, but we are only sending the traffic across on one active link at a time. Now, if that link drops out, you get routed through one of the other secondary tunnels sub-second, and the applications can operate without a hitch. It is a hot failover session persistence. WAN smoothing, again, is consistency. WAN smoothing uses that redundant data that gets sent across to cover the rough spots in connectivity. If you do have a flaky cell, is probably where I see this mostly come up, or two-way communication, voice calls, video conferencing rather than video streaming. Live broadcasts, that's where this is going to come into play, where you don't necessarily need horsepower, but you need 2 + 2 to give you a hard 2. How this works is, again, we're establishing the tunnel on all available WAN connections in the VPN. We send redundant copies across each connection, and whoever gets used first, or excuse me, gets there first will be used. The secondary or junk packets are going to get dropped out. And now again, if a link fails, we use the redundant copy. And WAN smoothing is going to optimize traffic for stability, less jitter, less packet loss. A cousin to WAN smoothing that we have now started to introduce with our latest firmware build is forward error correction. It uses a whole heck of a lot less data because FEC is more so one-way communication as opposed to two-way communication. A live video stream, live television, live audio. WAN smoothing, again, would be more so for VoIP, two-way communication, video conferencing. And we developed this to provide that packet dropout protection while trying to really minimize the bandwidth consumption. WAN smoothing is like duplicating the whole packet. FEC is just sending additional reserves that can swap in, can mitigate the effect of the loss versus interpolation. And then finally, again, bandwidth bonding. This is the raw horsepower that you're looking for, combining the bandwidth of all the internet connections together for maximum throughput. MPLS alternatives, that remote surveillance, all these high bandwidth options that you are looking for. Consistency isn't what's important, but it is not a top tier issue when you are just more so looking for the raw horsepower. And again, we're establishing the tunnel on all available WAN connections, and we split that application across all of them. The increased throughput becomes possible, however, And as I'm sure a few of you guys are already aware of, certain link combinations aren't really realistic, and we'll get into some of those rules. We still have hot failover, and that is on a sub-second level. But what you are trying to do is to get a 2 plus 2 gets you about a 3.7, 3.8, generally speaking. So again, if we're looking for keywords, hot failover, unbreakable, WAN smoothing, consistency, bandwidth bonding, that raw horsepower. And if you want to see how a few of our other customers have actually taken advantage of the various solutions, we got the names here, the case studies are on the site, go check them out. Well, let's go ahead and get into some more questions. When using PepVPN or SpeedFusion behind a firewall, you need to open the incoming ports of TCP 32015, UDP 4500, TCP and UDP 4500, or TCP 4500 and UDP 32015, or finally TCP 32015 or UDP, and UDP 4500, or according to either the data port default or custom settings. Give you a moment or two here. If you typed in E, you are absolutely correct. TCP 32015, UDP 4500 are our default ports for PepVPN. If you've gone ahead and changed where you want the handshake port to occur, you do need to make sure that you are opening that applicable port in your inbound firewall. All right, a little mental gymnastics for everybody. In a 3-site, fully meshed VPN deployment scenario, how many internet lines minimum are required to support hot failover as well as bandwidth bonding at all locations? 3, 4, 5, or 6? All right. If you typed into the chat 6, you're absolutely right. Because remember, in order to support the higher features of SpeedFusion, we do need multiple internet connections for them to take advantage of on that particular side. So for a 3-site setup, having 6 total internet connections, 2 at each point, is what we're going to be looking for. All right, so that's the concepts. Let's talk about the tech, how to set it up. First up through InControl 2. InControl 2, of course, gives you zero-touch configuration options to go ahead and create SpeedFusion between multiple groups of devices, multiple organization or account levels, or even a non-managed a non-IC2 managed Peplink device. We do support all the SpeedFusion deployments that you can through the UI, mesh, hub and spoke, or point-to-point, and we do support all advanced SpeedFusion features as well. To go ahead and set up from InControl 2, from the organization or the group level, choose PepVPN/SpeedFusion, choose configuration, and then go ahead and add profile. And then it's deploying at the particular level that you're looking to do things at, whether this is a hub and spoke or a star, a fully meshed, or a point-to-point or a partial mesh device. You're designating the endpoints or which units are participating in SpeedFusion. One of the features that was recently added into SpeedFusion builds from IC2 is disaster recovery. This allows you to create a secondary lower priority set of tunnels between each endpoint and wherever your DR hub is going to be at. This is the secondary hub that you have will be required to use 2 peers, licenses. Basically, you have the two tunnels up and running at different priority levels. This does allow, of course, for routing around bad connections to ensure your uptime. Once you've decided who's participating in the SpeedFusion tunnel, then we just go ahead and start to designate how we're looking to deploy matters. And again, we have all the same options in the UI that we do from in Control 2, even going into some of the advanced features. And we'll get through a few of those with the UI deployment. Once you have everything built in Control 2, it's just merely a matter of saving changes. To apply the profile to your devices, it begins to push out automatically. Once the tunnels are up and running, you can keep an eye on things both in a logical view or a GPS view, and I have no idea why those illustrations are flip-flopped. We'll get them fixed next time. And then also within the SpeedFusion profile screen, you can look into your map levels as well, depending on what you have designated. All right, now this is why we're here. UI configuration. This is where we'll get into some of the deep waters. Get comfy. So first off, we have to assign a local ID to the units that are going to participate. By default, it's using a mixture of the model and the last four serial number. And then once you have designated the local ID, we always recommend to put something in there that makes sense to you and easy type. Go ahead and choose New Profile. And then before we get too deep, much like the disaster recovery option from in Control 2, we do have a backup site option within the UI also. If that main PepVPN or SpeedFusion tunnel drops, you have set up another one to pick it up once things continue up and running. The handshake port is what we are negotiating on initially, and again, that's 32015 TCP. You can change what that port is to whatever you need it to be. You just click on that right help icon to expose it, and then you can designate whatever. Next up is the link failure detection time. What this is doing is, think of it as like our WANs have health check options. The PepVPN tunnel has health check options as well. Routing failures that go along the path either way. Failed WANs aren't used. What you can designate here is how often you want that test to occur. I will say, generally speaking, we usually recommend leaving it at the recommended every 15 seconds. Again, you've got another layer of security already in place on the WAN level, where this one is just more, think of this as a backup, as a way to ensure that things are up and running. In addition, keep in mind, of course, that if you start to shorten that time up a bit, you're going to chew up more data because it's sending more health check packets across. So, forewarned is forearmed. And then we go into the basic configuration. On each SpeedFusion tier, just simply name the profile. Of course, that's just it's just a name. You can call it fuzzy bunny slippers if you really want to. You enter the remote ID of the other Peplink balance, and the remote ID, of course, is the local ID of the other endpoint. You enter in the WAN IP or the DDNS host name of the remote peer that we talked about before. You do only need to do that technically on one of the endpoints, and that's where we are building towards, the hub and spoke or the star deployment. Save and apply your changes. Now down below here with the WAN connection priority, if you leave them all at the same priority, much as default 1 highest, this is our bandwidth bonding deployment. It's using all the connections equally. Let's start getting into some of the lesser known options within the tunnel. First up, NAT mode. Now with NAT mode, the remote unit VPN is going to be assigned a local DHCP, getting an IP from the local pool. And then what it's doing is all of the traffic coming from that remote endpoint to this end is going to go through a NAT and get that assigned IP address. Kind of like going through a firewall under most circumstances, or a router rather. You know, you go through, once you hit the LAN, you're going to get a local IP. You enable that with NAT mode here. Cost. This is a relatively new feature that we've added into SpeedFusion configuration. And what this means is we're kind of front-facing the OSPF cost. And what you're doing is for the route, you're assigning a value, and then what Peplink is trying to do is to quote-unquote save you money. So for the example here, we've got a mesh deployment, A, B, and C. A to C has a 30 cost, A to B and B to C have a 10 cost. So if all these tunnels are up and running at any given, together, we're going to avoid the A to C hop more so than A to B, B to C, if that makes sense. The data port is the outgoing UDP for the VPN transmission. If you go with auto, we're either going to do UDP 4500 or 32015 based on availability. Like we talked about before, if you do have IPsec or L2TP with IPsec up and running, we won't use 4500, we'll use UDP 32015. You can again customize things here as well. On firmware 8, our brand new builds, under that data port help icon on that experimental section, you can actually toggle TCP data mode. UDP is going to move a bit slower on a few of the ISPs out there. Now, what TCP data mode allows you to do is to work around it by adding a layer of encapsulation with TCP. You can use this to help alleviate ISP packet loss for all of these UDP traffic application types. And once you enable the feature, again, it's that experimental section under data port, you'll see a brand new drop-down box allowing you to toggle to TCP. WAN smoothing. Again, this is what we talked about with consistency. You enable WAN smoothing here on the VPN profile level, and then designate how much bandwidth that you are sending across, that redundant bandwidth rather. And then what you can also do is cap the maximum level on that same link, basically meaning you can put an upper and a lower ceiling on it. Forward error correction, the cousin of WAN smoothing, also set up here on the PepVPN level. The higher the FEC level will recover packets on a higher loss rate link because you're sending more of those redundant packets across. Either 13.3% overload or 26.7 overload. And again, this is what we're talking about is swapping some of these reserved packets in via interpolation. And then finally, the receive buffer. This is for video streaming, reducing those out of order packets, minimizing jitter, but it does add overhead to the tunnel, extra latency, because we're doing a lot more work here. By default, we're doing 0 milliseconds of buffer, and the maximum is 2 seconds. 2 seconds? Yeah, well, 2,000 milliseconds in any event. So if you're using this on a VoIP or a TCP traffic tunnel, don't do it, because you're adding a lot more latency into the mix and just are going to torpedo your efforts. Next group of advanced settings we'll find under the WAN connection priority settings at the bottom of the PepVPN profile. First up, asymmetric connections. This gives you the ability to designate a particular WAN for upload or download use only. It's useful for some of those uneven connections, like a DSL, for example, that don't perform well on the upload. You got like a 25 by 5, for example. Once you have it enabled, you'll see the new option for direction for the particular WANs there available via dropdown. Connection mapping allows you to force a particular WAN connection to one of the remote WANs. Basically, that WAN is only connecting to the WAN on the other end, and that's it. This can be a single, and usually is, but you can also select multiple WANs on the other side. When you know one internet connection works well with the other, this is where you start to set up some of those connection mappings to really get in and tweak things once you understand what you have. Connection mapping has been hot since 7.1 firmware, and you'll see the option again in that drop-down menu via the WAN connections once enabled via the help icon. The cutoff latency was an unofficial rule that we had before, now that we're starting to iterate and front face to the customer. So you're assigning a latency threshold to a WAN, and if you go beyond that, SpeedFusion stops using that particular WAN until it comes back under that threshold. Old school wise, this was 1,000 milliseconds. If you went above that, it would drop out of the tunnel. Now, when it does drop out, it's not a dead link. We're still doing health checks. We're still testing latency. And then that way we can get it back into the mix as quickly as possible. And you assign that cutoff latency again, just in the WAN connection priority menu after enabling with the help icon. And then finally, the customized suspension time. Now, if this SpeedFusion tunnel has packet loss from a particular WAN, the tunnel gets suspended for however long you're designating. I mean, you don't want to go too hog wild with things here. Try to keep the minimum around the RTP. Cutoff latency and packet loss pullback time only goes in the transmit, but not the receive. If you want to have them affect both ways, you got to set this up on both sides of the tunnel, if that makes sense. And again, that suspension time after packet loss, right here in the WAN connection priority options. Next group of features are back up into the PepVPN profile option. That help icon in the upper right, the first up being the IPTOS field. This feature doesn't get a lot of play. When you enable it, the TOS value of the packet gets copied to the PepVPN header, so it's on the outside during encapsulation. So when you have this deployed in a network that has VoIP up and running along with normal PC traffic, and you don't want to have VoIP prioritized over SpeedFusion. Now, if you're using a non-Peplink gateway that gets configured with QoS, you're not stripping that header, the value off the header packet when it gets repackaged in the SpeedFusion VPN. Here's how it works. You have the things behind. We have our edge router behind the Peplink device. TOS gets applied on the edge router, hits the Peplink tunnel. That TOS is kept on the outside during encapsulation, hits the other side, and you're still able to prioritize traffic. The latency difference cutoff basically means traffic is stopped for links that hit that value. We talked about it a little bit, But again, what we're talking about here, it bears repeating that this is the value that you're assigning of low performance. So if you have a WAN that goes all the way up to 2 seconds of latency, you really don't want to have that in the tunnel all the time, bringing down your overall performance. Here's the big one. This is where we start to add traffic steering within SpeedFusion, the multiple tunnels between 2 sites. Outbound policy within SpeedFusion. This allows you to create up to 5 SpeedFusion subtunnels within the VPN. And within each of those subtunnels can have different rule sets in play. Different LAN connections in there, different priorities, a different mix of connections, when smoothing on one but not the other, as well as setting bandwidth data caps for each of the tunnels. And then once you have those tunnels up and running, that's where, oh, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. This is what it looks like once you have those subtunnels up and running. You'll see the tabs across the top that you're labeling them as necessary. Now with firmware 8, one of the cool things we can do now is have these subtunnels either deployed at layer 2 or layer 3 between the same points. They all kind of feed to the same concept. You have those VPN subtunnels up and running, and then are able to set outbound policy or traffic steering rules to it. This is how we provide quality of service over SpeedFusion. New to firmware 8 is our DPI traffic steering options that also ties into our outbound policy layout. This gives you the ability to send application level traffic or rules from one point to the other. Once you have it up and running, you'll see a whole new section under protocol talking about the particular applications that Peplink has the ability to track. And then we get into NAT mode. We have a couple of ways to deploy NAT mode, one of which we've already touched on a little bit, which is our many-to-one NAT. Again, traffic that comes from the other endpoint hits the Peplink device and is going, can get a local IP given for all traffic from the tunnel. The more interesting approach in any event, potentially more elegant, is what we call our one-to-one NAT. And you see what we're doing here is with the subnet gets replaced by an entire virtual network. So, and this is going to override the OSPF of the remote connections. A only sees B, B only sees C, etc. The router address itself is going to be changed, and the clients on the other endpoints are able to be reached by those virtual network addresses. The Peplink is going to be doing that translation to give you access to the remote LAN. Now, a regular NAT, of course, is a client-server setup. Clients on one site are not going to be able to be reached from the other unless you're setting up NAT mapping, port forwarding, whatever. Whereas with the one-to-one NAT, we get around that. Each client's virtual IP gets used, each client's IP is going to keep the host while the network ID is replaced. So we're giving it a temporary one that you're able to go ahead and reach things with. That's a lot to go through. So once you finally get all of that set up and running, you are able to see the status from the UI dashboard accordingly. All right, let's do some questions. What is a possible misstep problem that prevents SpeedFusion from establishing? Is it not having the same amount of WANs on either side? Same WAN subnet on either side? Same LAN on either side? not having the same model of Peplink on either side, or none of the above. Let you have put some into the chat. If you said same LAN on either side, you'd be correct. Now again, this is where that one-to-one NAT that we are starting to push out to people is going to get around this somewhat. But at its basic level, you need unique LAN subnets on either end of a tunnel to prevent routing confusion. Which parameter does not affect SpeedFusion bonding efficiency? Link latency, link packet loss, number of LAN connections, or clients rather, or buffer bloat from an ISP. We'll give you a couple of moments. We really don't care how many LAN clients are behind a particular Peplink. It just simply doesn't come into play when we're talking about how well a SpeedFusion tunnel is up and running. Remember, SpeedFusion is Peplink to Peplink, not LAN client to LAN client. All right, so we've talked about the concepts. We've talked about how to deploy. Let's talk a little bit about some optimization tips that we have for you. Generally speaking, to get the best use out of a SpeedFusion tunnel, we recommend using similar WANs of similar speed and similar latency. Speeds within about 50% of each other and similar latency characteristics of about 150 millisecond swing either way. If you start to bond disparate connections together, you do lose a little bit off of the top for maintenance, encryption, and upkeep of the tunnel. The math alone could start to bring things down. And basically meaning we wouldn't want you to bond a gig fiber connection to a meg and a half DSL, for example. You're not going to get 101 out of it. But what you can do in those instances is start to take advantage of the other options of SpeedFusion. So if that fiber does drop, you do have the DSL, the T1, the whatever, the secondary connection is able to keep up and running for hot failover, for session persistence. We do also recommend mixing up your carriers to allow for the best possible throughput. It does happen a lot, especially with cellular connections, data slicing, or when each of the modems are trying to grab from the same cell tower. And that's something outside of our control. So if you start to mix things up, you have an AT&T to, a Verizon, a DSL, you're going to get the best use out of things because you're not wholly reliant on the whims of the carrier one way or the other. Talking about losing a bit off of the top. So when the data hits a SpeedFusion tunnel, it gets encapsulated, and that is going to add some additional packet headers and all that's in there is instructions to rebuild the session once it hits the other side. This is going to add 80 bytes of data regardless of the MTU or the original data packet size. And if you want to contrast things, IPsec does 58. SpeedFusion bandwidth bonding is more efficient now when we're using some of those larger packet sizes. So for example, like a 1500 MTU, SpeedFusion is just going to add 5% of bandwidth overhead. But if we drop that down to 40 bytes, that SpeedFusion overhead rises to over 200, to 200% plus. So when you compare and contrast IPsec to SpeedFusion, for just an additional 4.4% of extra bandwidth, you're taking advantage of bonding and session persistence. Now, when you talk to a customer to set expectations about how your bonded, how SpeedFusion will perform, a typical mix of internet traffic, we have a mixture of VoIP, of PC, etc. Anywhere from about 10 to 19% of the data transmitted is SpeedFusion overhead. So using those numbers, you can start to calculate how much expected throughput you're going to get through the tunnel. So for this example here, on the headquarters side, we got 100 by 100. And then on the remote site in this MBX, we got two 10 by 2 connections. So here we can see I showed my map down below, your real world up and downloads. So what we have here is 10 plus 10, which is 20, less than 19% is going to give you about a 16.2 meg download. On the upload side, again, we're doing 2 plus 2 is 4, less 19% gets you 3.24 meg. So again, remember, 2 plus 2 does not equal 4. You do have to take into account overhead into the mix. Latency is also going to affect performance. And in essence, what we're talking about here is if you have a slower connection in play, for example, a VSAT connection, those packets take longer, of course, to get to the other end of the tunnel. With such a weird mix of speeds, that can and will affect the performance of the VPN. Again, don't necessarily look at horsepower as the end-all be-all. SpeedFusion brings a lot of other tricks to the table. So, generally speaking, higher latency connections for, use them in backup for more WAN failover, or for traffic that doesn't necessarily need the here and now, your normal day-to-day web traffic. SpeedFusion itself can help out here, both with WAN smoothing and FEC, as we talked about as well. Make sure that you have real-world numbers for all of your available WAN connections that you're using, speedtest.net, nperf.com. Make sure you know how the WAN performs outside of SpeedFusion. If it's terrible outside, it doesn't magically get healed inside. And then cellular and satellite, again, make sure that you got strong power, that the backhaul is doing good, and that we're not doing any data slicing at the tower or satellite that you're connected to. All of these are going to affect your bottom line. And then finally, with cellular considerations, we talked a little bit about data slicing or windowing. That's when multiple hits are going up to the tunnel, or to the tower rather, at any given moment. The example here, we got 3 hitting the tower, and each of them are getting 33 and 0.33333 megs out of the mix. However, if one of our people are going through one of our Max mobile devices and has installed an additional SIM in place, as you can see, each of those modems are starting to hit up here, and they will get, in effect, double out of the mix. 100 by 4 by 2 gives them that 50. So again, forewarned is forearmed, and make sure that you are planning to take best advantage of the internet connections that you have in play, regardless of the delivery method, to get the best use out of SpeedFusion. Let's get into this last group of questions. All right, so for branches having the same LAN network, we should allow them to configure a virtual network range, which can be assigned to the local network that has the conflict. An HQ site will only see the virtual network, and the conflict network is hidden from the HQ. What's the name? Virtual network mapping, SpeedFusion NAT mode, NAT mapping, port forwarding, or recommend to change a branch's LAN subnet to avoid the overlap. Give you a couple of moments. Our brand new feature as of 7.1, that virtual network mapping, the ability to go ahead and assign a virtual network to the remote end and have those LAN clients be able to get a virtual IP from the Peplink to give you access. We bring a lot of tools to the table. WAN smoothing is in here. WAN smoothing should be enabled when you first establish the tunnel. Users are complaining about the speed being slow. Jitter when you do video streaming. One-way audio for VoIP, but no packet loss found. Jitter on your VoIP call, or intermittently when accessing the email. You have intermittent issues when accessing the email server at headquarters. All right. So again, WAN smoothing is best for two-way communication, video VoIP calls, video conferencing, those things where you need that back and forth, that consistency to keep the session up and running. Guys, thank you so much for letting me come and start to get you up to speed for the Peplink certification exam. Keep up to date even further with our active social media platforms. We're on all the major channels. If you come up with any other questions once you get off the call today, our form.peplink.com is going to be a great tool for you to get things, to get questions answered. It's an active community anywhere from the end user to the engineering team themselves. With that, let's start cracking open some questions here and see if I can help you out. Let's go first with the QA. Will we have any copy for content for today's training? Absolutely. The session has been recorded, and we'll have the deck available for download as well. How many times can you take them? That's a fair question. I know we have one of my colleagues, Cassie, was in the mix here somewhere. I believe I'm unsure how often you can take the exam here. I know at least once, but if you do get multiple attempts, Cassie will let you know here, or go ahead and poke it up on our form. Juan Carlos, hey, how's it going, man? Can we assure to our customers that they do not need a firewall behind the Peplink? No, they don't need it. They can have one, of course. The Peplink itself is an SPI firewall. SpeedFusion is, it is adding security to the data as well. It's not a requirement. Yep, we will get the slides. Is SpeedFusion WAN-to-WAN PCI compliant? I believe so, but before I make that an official answer, it's something I would have to just do a little digging on further. Throw it up in the form. Allison, looks like you would ask that. Go ahead and put it up there, but I believe, like I said, I believe so. Genter, is InControl 2 an all-in-one dashboard / gateway to set up all the boxes? Definitely. It's cloud management. It's just incontrol2.peplink.com. We have zero-touch configuration options. We do have traffic steering rules that you can set up. There is firewall rules you can set up. There is a lot you can do to keep an eye on things. Juan Carlos, can coexist local SpeedFusion and IC2FSs? And IC2 SpeedFusion, I'm guessing, is what you're saying. And no, it's one. I mean, you're either deploying it from the cloud or locally. If that's not what you mean, go ahead and retype and I'll take another crack at it. Jan Luigi asks, hi, to get a sub-second hot failover link health check should be set at an extreme level. Well, if we're talking about the SpeedFusion health check method, again, generally, I mean, you can certainly dial it up if you like, but it is going to add bandwidth overhead to things. If that's not an issue, go for it. We do generally recommend, however, to leave it at the recommended for the tunnel to check every 15 seconds. And then you can adjust on the WAN level as far as how often you want those health checks to go, because they're all going to feed into each other. Clifton, can you exclude local networks from participating in PepVPN? What happens when there are conflicting subnets? Well, to answer the second part first, the conflicting subnet options can now start to be addressed with our virtual LAN, virtual NAT opportunities. Whether you're going through and natting the whole, all the traffic from the other side, or doing it with our one-to-ones as well. Can you exclude local networks from participating in SpeedFusion? Absolutely. You can set up outbound policy rules to steer traffic outside of the tunnel. It's one of the SD-WAN requirements. Ian, what is the resource overhead on the router when using full mesh SpeedFusion through IC2? Well, again, as far as SpeedFusion in and of itself is concerned, we're saying, the rule of thumb is about 19% overhead. And that number will change depending on what kind of internet connections are in play, the MTU size, etc. In control 2 in and of itself is not really adding into that number at all, honestly. Connor, hey guys, if you were providing this as service, can you have a head-to-end setup where you're going to end up mixing customer traffic? No, as a matter of fact, SpeedFusion as a service is something a few of our partners have already started to take advantage of. There's a company in Chicago that I could think of off the top of my head that's doing exactly that. SpeedFusion is your connectivity part of the mix, and then you can certainly integrate other services to that as you need to. Mohammed, what is firmware 8 or FW8? Firmware 8. It's our latest release, which should be coming out here, I'm hoping, within the next week or so. If you head over to just the open-beta-program part of the Peplink site, you can get release candidates to test away. Last I heard, we're on release candidate 4 and set to release very quickly. You can, of course, also go ahead and deploy beta releases from in control 2 as well. There's a little checkbox you got to hit. Sogun, I have a 2-WAN setup in a 305. I'm using drop-in mode, but one of my, I'm assuming WANs is always showing DNS test fail, even though setting the DNS to quad 8. Without being able to see a diagnostic report, it's kind of hard to say why you might be failing the DNS. This would go into some of your basic troubleshooting steps. Make sure we don't have a conflict. Make sure that it works outside of the box consistently. If you are having issues with it, Sogan, go ahead and let's get a ticket started and we'll start to take a look at it. Daniel, why doesn't it come with TCP by default? I assume you're talking about the TCP data mode with SpeedFusion, and the jokey answer is it's a bit above my pay grade as far as when engineering was able to get things up and running. Honestly, I don't have a better answer than that at the moment. Makesh, regarding error correction WAN FEC and WAN smoothing, you mentioned that you don't enable on VoIP. Can we select the networks within SpeedFusion to exclude those? In some cases, both data and VoIP use the same tunnels. Well, that's a case where you might want to take a look at the TOS field, outer encapsulations to do that, to make sure that you're still prioritizing VoIP traffic. Or conversely, again, you could break that data away from SpeedFusion and just send out of a local WAN. We do have the sub-tunnel options where you can send some through one and others through another. Those you do have a few tools available to you. Connor, do you see the receive buffer impacting on two-way streams? Definitely, and that's why we say don't go crazy with it. Sultan, can I get a video of this or the slides? We'll have both available. Mode, I have issue with my balance 580 on firmware 7.0. The issue is my VPN IPsec doesn't get past partial established. It doesn't completely connect up without doing a full up and down. So troublesome. I'd agree. Let's get a ticket on it and see what's going on. If you're just not knowing your 580 hardware build, firmware update as well may not be a bad idea either. But a diagnostic while things are going squirrely, and we can dig into it further. Ladib, is there any difference between PepVPN and SpeedFusion? PepVPN is a level of SpeedFusion. If you remember the pyramid I put up earlier, that shows PepVPN is kind of the most basic level of SpeedFusion that you can deploy. Single WAN to single WAN. It's like an IPsec tunnel, but a lot easier to set up. And SpeedFusion kind of encapsulates that whole pyramid. Harry, if I'm not using SpeedFusion, just PepVPN between two PepWave devices with one behind a coax with a dynamic DNS on the public side, do I need to pass both 32015 and 4500 to the local WAN of the PepWave? Again, excuse me, for establishment, even on PepVPN, it's 32015 and 4500 that are going to need access to get things up and running. If you leave it at default, I mean, depending on what you got in front of the devices, it again, that's where we're talking about letting the traffic through the firewall, through the net, to make sure that you can establish a tunnel. If you head over to our forum, just forum.peplink.com again, we do have a really good KB that does go into that and to some detail as well. Connor, is default cutoff latency still 1,000 milliseconds? Yes, but you can now designate it upper or lower if you so see fit. Solon, email address, I meant more so shoot us an email for it. Brandon, what kind of security is utilized by IC2? When I set it up, all I needed to provide was the serial number of my devices, and I am able to fully control the device without providing any device password information. If my device's serial numbers were ever compromised or guessed, could anyone create an IC2 account and edit the device's configuration? And a little bit to unpack here. When you set up your IC2 account, yes, you are putting in your the boxes to report into IC2. It's not just using, and if that serial number is registered to another account, you're not going to be able to associate it to, they can't associate it if you already have. So guessing a serial number won't matter. Secondly, and the only way to get a unit removed does require us to step in, and we have a few protocols in place to make sure that we're not just stripping a unit off of one account to add to another willy-nilly. Nick, can WAN smoothing and FEC be used together separately? Curtis, is there a virtual Peplink appliance for Azure? Yes, there is Fusion Hub instances for Azure. Anonymous, I've registered for 1 and 2, but I haven't gotten any PCW exam email confirmation. Those were supposed to go out yesterday, from what I understand. Shoot us an email to CS at we'll do both, CS@peplink.com and marketing@peplink.com. And then we can certainly confirm that you got things up and running on our end for you to get that confirmation. Todd, does the link still allow inbound connections while it's suspended? I asked specifically for VoIP that register under one WAN IP, then the link is suspended and the traffic will still be sent to the suspended link until the VoIP phone re-registers a few minutes later. If the suspended link stops accepting inbound traffic, calls will be missed between the time the link is suspended and the phone re-registers from the other WAN IP. All right. So what I think we're talking about here, Todd, is sending that VoIP traffic through the SpeedFusion tunnel. Again, this is where a multi-WAN deployment, is something we're going to, that we would wholeheartedly recommend to make sure you have the best VoIP experience. That way, if one WAN does drop out, session persistence is still going to keep that call up and running over the other available WAN connections until that troublesome WAN pops back into play and we can start sending there as well. This is the bread and butter of what we do with it. James, when did you send out the exam info? I assume you mean the confirmations. My understanding was yesterday. Avanish, I am attending the event today, so can I take the exam after the 17th? You sure can. I'm officially out of sight, so I can take it afterwards. That's fine. Anonymous, how long is this training session? At this point, depends how many questions we have. Jared, will all the questions on the PCE exam be discussed in these webinars, or will extra learning be needed? Extra learning will be needed. We're picking example ones from the pool of 130. If we did the 130, these sessions would be twice as long. Lucas, similar bandwidth is a must on site A or both A and B. A and B. Well, let me walk that one just a little bit. If SpeedFusion, again, works best with similar speeds, similar latencies. If you have, 100 by 100 fiber at your headquarters and going to a couple MBXs with cells, that the fiber on the headquarters side probably is going to be fairly consistent. This is, again, where pre-planning comes into play and understanding your needs for the deployment. Harry, how do I get diagnostic information about a PepVPN connection? I want to see what data connections are being made to establish a given VPN tunnel so I can pinpoint why the tunnel fails to establish. On my VR1 and my Surf Solo, it doesn't give any detailed information about why a VPN fails to establish. Diagnostic report. Again, what I would make sure, again, is our pre-planning is good. We're not overlapping a subnet. We have the WANs performing well outside of the PepVPN connection. And then if everything looks good in there, we can swing things into the units and start to take a look to see why things are breaking down. If you're asking about the stages of SpeedFusion or PepVPN on the dashboard, it does not face further information than creating tunnel, establishing, etc. Is PepVPN proprietary, Daniel asks, or will it work with third-party VPN gateway or routers? It is proprietary. It is Peplink to Peplink. Unknown, when setting the MTU for a given WAN connection, do you have to add the 80 bytes for SpeedFusion overhead? If my MTU is 1500, should I set it to 1580? Well, again, the 80 bytes, I mean, is constant no matter the packet size. So take that into account accordingly. Daniel, I understand SpeedFusion will not work. Apologize, I forget what this is in response to. Mike, is there a way to increase the upload speed and reduce the download speed? Yes and no. I mean, you can set individual bandwidth caps, but it's on the WAN level, and then those WANs, feed into the overall throughput that the SpeedFusion tunnel has. There's not a direct way to do it within the SpeedFusion tunnel, if that's what you're asking. Sogun, is it important to enable the health check method? Absolutely. Both on the WAN level and on the tunnel level. This is diagnostic tools that that Peplink has, rather, to make sure to keep things up and running. Couple people asking about having the PowerPoint afterwards. Definitely. Connor, does Peplink work in an HA scenario? Absolutely. We support standard VRRP. Oh, here we got some of our question answers. Perfect. Barley, how does ZTP work in Peplink by SMS or email or what? Can you elaborate a little bit? How much application support for DPI? Roughly speaking, if you look under our QoS section currently, it's analogous as far as what we recognize. And finally, so WAN bonding is active-passive configuration, not AA or doubling our bandwidth. Depends on how you deploy it. WAN bonding is 2 + 2 gets you that 3, 7, 3, 8. WAN smoothing isn't necessarily horsepower. It's, again, redundancy, stability. So keep in mind how you want to deploy SpeedFusion. Mohammed, can you use WAN smoothing on a case-by-case basis? Absolutely. He also asked, when do you have conferences going on? Forum.peplink.com, probably the best place to keep a look at. James, I would like to set up 3 labs at 3 different locations. Should I use the forum for assistance? Yeah, there's a design lab section that we can get some people in there to help out with. Johan, is there a practice exam? I don't think so, but that actually isn't a bad idea. That's something I should bring up to our team to see if there's like some ones to practice with. Mark, is SpeedFusion also a good option for a push vessel? A push vessel? I guess I'm not 100% sure of the term, but I will say cautiously, yes. Benjamin, so software version can be used instead of a secondary device. Would this need to be running on a VPS? SpeedFusion is Peplink to Peplink. And we do have a virtual SpeedFusion termination point, which we'll be getting into more next week, called Fusion Hub. And that is absolutely deployable on VMware or cloud platforms to terminate against. So you'd only need the one balance or max pointing to that Fusion Hub. And on top of that, if you head over to our website and look under the Fusion Hub section, we do actually have our Fusion Hub Solo, which is a one-peer connection that you can deploy to take advantage of SpeedFusion as well for absolutely free. Alex, is SpeedFusion available on all devices? Pretty much, at least at the PepVPN level. You're not going to get bonding on all of them, but you are able to get connectivity pretty much on everything. Mukesh, can we manage traffic priority on WAN links in SpeedFusion? We had a case where there was a 50 meg internet link and a 4 meg MPLS. They were having complaints over the performance. That's exactly where quality of service is starting to come into play now. You can set up those sub-tunnels and start to route accordingly. John, will certified resellers now be required to keep their Peplink certifications current? Never a bad idea. We're always adding to the mix, right, sir? Marco, what about a next-gen firewall? Stay tuned. I mean, if it's one thing, and I've been with the company now about 10 years, that I've been continually impressed with, is how quickly sometimes that they get a new platform in play. Our XG series is probably the biggest ones right now with the with some of the more modular approaches that we're taking, the MDX, the EPX, etc. Peter, is there a good study guide to review to prepare for the exam? Yep, training.peplink.com. We have our modules up there. That certainly goes over quite a bit. Daniel, is PepVPN or SpeedFusion HIPAA compliant? My understanding is yes. Shoot and throw a post up on the forum about it, and we can get you further detailed information. Giovanni, is there anything in the works to allow SpeedFusion VPN through a CGNAT cellular provider with no ability to open TCP and UDP ports? Thinking. I've not heard of one. I've not heard yet, but again, forum.peplink.com. Throw it up there. We'll get you what you need. Anonymous, is there an online demo to play with the Peplink? We do have online versions of both the balance and the max interfaces up on the site. If you go under the products tab for each of the two categories, you'll see web demo at the bottom. Take a look. Donald, I use InControl 2 to manage my family's Petwood in Soho in Canada. Is there a way to schedule time by device? You can certainly set schedules, for a variety of options, and then tag a function to the schedule once you get things up and running. Yeah, format, we could talk further. Poe, possible to set up inbound load balancing in HA. Well, I mean, you can do that currently. I mean, we certainly do VRRP, and you could set up inbound load balancing as necessary. Now, if you're talking about routing some traffic to A and B concurrently, that's not generally how we go, but it might be possible with a bit more under the hood tinkering. Anonymous, SpeedFusion license, will that be active for a lifetime if we configure one time? Definitely. Ladib, how can we specify the VPN domains, the subnets that have to speak to each other on the tunnel? I assume you're talking about the one-to-one NATs here. Once you enable the feature on current firmware, you should see the option to designate that virtual NAT. Anonymous, if you can use SpeedFusion bonding to increase your overall bandwidth to the internet from A, which has 4 WAN, through headquarters, which has the higher overall throughput, or is it only from site A to headquarters? Remember, SpeedFusion is point to point. So you have your SpeedFusion created between A and headquarters, and if you send the data through the tunnel, you're certainly taking advantage of aggregation and bandwidth. And then through headquarters, if that wants to route out to the internet, that's one way to go about it. But not just, if you're going site A and just breaking out to the internet, that's just going to be using whatever particular internet connection that it has available to it, if that makes sense. Daniel, why is traffic UDP by default when TCP is faster? Is it because of the latency? That's my understanding. And again, that UDP, my understanding as well is that it's also a conditional speed increase, but I could be wrong about that. About the PCE exam, you can send the confirmation. My understanding is that most of those should have went out yesterday, but we'll look through again today and make sure. And how many questions for the exam? Again, it's a pool of about 130 that it's pulling out of. I believe it's around 100 that you'll be doing. Again, Jared, I think you asked that previously. configuration in there on the site. Bertino, what's the best practice for Peplink in front of a firewall or behind a firewall? I assume you mean what's the best way to go about it. What happens when we get attacked by DDoS or else? Please advise. Generally speaking, we're meant to slot in front of the firewall. So it'd be your routers going into the balance into the firewall into your local network. You can certainly deploy the balance behind a firewall. Again, you just have to make sure that you're opening the appropriate application ports for whatever services that you're looking for. What happens, DDoS, we do have some built-in options within the Peplink. Again, we're an SPI firewall. We do have some touch of death protections that you can enable on the back end as well. But a full-fledged firewall is the best approach for your, is going to have more options for you to protect your network than a balance does. So generally, work in tandem. Have your UTM be a UTM and let us handle the horsepower. Jason, does changing routes force a renegotiation of the SpeedFusion tunnel, causing the tunnel to drop? Changing routes force negotiation. Elaborate a little bit on that one. I have to think about it. Eric, how often do we need to renew our certification? I believe it's every 2 years. It might be 2 to 3 years. I don't have it in front of me, to be perfectly blunt. Eric, is it not recommended to have both WAN smoothing and FEC on? Again, no. It's you're choosing your. I mean, you can. This again is where that sub-tunnel approach comes into play. But if we're talking one base SpeedFusion tunnel, generally speaking, you're going to be doing one or the other for best performance. Otherwise, again, if you have, think again on where these are going to be best used at and apply accordingly. These traffic steering rules that we have in place for the tunnel is going to be the best way to go about it. Jason, port security on device in the field. Prevent untrusted devices plugging into LAN, gaining access to the corporate LAN. Host security on device in the field. Well, if you are using In Control 2, for example, it will certainly show you, especially if you're using one of our SD switches, you can see LAN client connectivity and go ahead and set up rules accordingly to screen or block out. That's probably, off the top of my head. But again, form.peplink.com, we could talk further. Juan Carlos, what happens to SpeedFusion config on IC2 if the service is not renewed? The tunnels don't drop. You're just not, again, once you build it in IC2 and it's pushed to the devices in the field. So if coverage elapses on IC2, they're not reporting live to IC2 anymore, but they're still going to be going through their day-to-day with whatever that last config push gave them. Dory, how would SpeedFusion perform if we use a VSAT connection combined with LTE? Probably a bit hairy, to be perfectly honest. But again, this is kind of the message that I wanted to make sure y'all get today. SpeedFusion does not just mean horsepower, does not just mean bandwidth. You do have hot failover, you do have WAN smoothing. There are other opportunities for SpeedFusion with these disparate connections. So in an example like this, I would absolutely do a hot failover setup, LTE as your primary, and then if that fails over, VSAT then kicks in. I know VSAT, generally speaking, more expensive than the LTE anyway. Vertina, how to get 0 RTO with SpeedFusion? What do we, sorry, we've gone on long here. Define RTO for me. Marwin, how can I get the log on the WAN links? Well, there's a few ways you can go about it. depending on what you're looking for. Bandwidth utilization, of course, available both from IC2 as well as within the UI. You can set up event logging rule. You can set up event logging rules to see connectivity in that regard. There's a few options available to you depending on what you're looking for. Do you recommend the watchdog feature? Is it replaced by something else on the Peplink modems? Forum.peplink.com. I'd have to dig. I don't have a full answer on that yet. Bob, I hear version 8 is nearly with us. Can you summarize its new features? I actually just had a webinar last week about that. There is a lot of smoothing out connectivity options with a lot of the pieces. I've touched on a little bit of it within the talk today here. Forum.peplink.com will give you the rest of it. Have the slides? Definitely. What can we do with a Peplink hardware revision 1 for upgrading to the latest version of firmware? Unfortunately, not a lot, depending on the hardware. Firmware is tied to the hardware platforms in part. Better CPU, better boards. So there, you'd be able to upgrade hopefully to some point that is close to current gen. Otherwise, you would want to certainly think about upgrading the equipment. Do you have any on the website, both Balance and the Max, there is the UI up there for you to play with. Clifton, excluding subnets from PepVPN, sorry. I meant so that we don't have to deal with conflicting management networks causing the PepVPN tunnel to not establish because of conflicting routes. Again, I think this would be... I think you would still have to either set up a NAT or the like. I don't think screening out a particular subnet is going to work for you. But I would want to talk to my advanced guy to be sure. Ian, I'm talking to the CPU overhead on the router since you're now adding OSPF in addition to the SpeedFusion tunnel. Well, again, the SpeedFusion tunnel in and of itself isn't going to add a lot to it. SpeedFusion is at 80 bytes into the mix. So, I mean, you can certainly adjust for it to try to up your speed values. But, think of that as a constant. Clifton, I'd like to avoid the NAT option if possible. Wouldn't we all, brother? Simon, can you get a SpeedFusion client for a PC? I know about the SpeedFusion clients for server farms. I think you must be talking about Fusion Hub. No, I have not heard any rumblings towards a L2TP or PPTP type SpeedFusion connection as of yet. Never say never, though. If there's enough people who want it, they'll look into it. Can Fusion Hub run on bare metal without a hypervisor? Negative. It does need to be installed to a VMware instance. Carlos, is it possible to assign QoS and WAN link order by application? Well, I mean, you do have the QoS option where again, you're looking at it on the application level. Within SpeedFusion, you're doing it to the sub-tunnel. So, to a point, you can. Lee, after the exam, the result's going to be displayed on the spot? Yep, you'll know if you pass right away. Anonymous, why some devices did not include bonding feature on your website page? Now, again, don't conflate PepVPN with bonding. That's an important distinction. We can get connectivity between everybody, but not necessarily bonding. Mohammed, would you consider to introduce individual login accounts rather than using a default admin generic account? They're considering it, and I know you can certainly adjust both the name and the password, so, you do have that. Ferrantino, RTO, when one of the links failed from 2 WAN SpeedFusion for both of them. Form, we'll talk about it. James, where are all these questions being asked and seen? These are the Q&A section, James. I hoped that the questions were being displayed on the screen still. They may not be, so that's why I'm reading them. Thomas, can you build multiple layer 2 SpeedFusion tunnels between 2 Peplink devices? Up to 5. Sumero, May 17th, 2019 is the exam day. What time will the exam begin and what time will the exam be stopped? Do you have 100 minutes? It starts when you hit the button. Anonymous, will you review Peplink Wi-Fi in session 2? Yep, it is getting covered. Connor, I'm assuming you folks don't have a method of sending layer 2 across. I mean, again, we can deploy SpeedFusion at layer 2, so if that's what you're asking. Gabriel, you mentioned subtunnels. Can this be mapped as 802.12 tags? You can send traffic across the tunnel based on a tag. Will the SD-WAN controller replace IC2? I suppose eventually, but they're going to run concurrent for quite some time. Can we restrict the user to download the content from the Peplink media fast? That's a good question. We'll have to dig into it. Daniel, on WAN failover with VoIP environment, if calls are on WAN 1 and WAN 1 drops and transfers to 2, a portion of the phones always gets stuck on WAN 2. Oh, we've been here 2 hours. Users then report they cannot dial extension to extension. They were missing calls when interesting, because I mean they should, you know. I'd be curious if it was a particular phone manufacturer, something something on the LAN client level, making it sticky to where it establishes how you got SpeedFusion up and running. Get a ticket up to us, or to your partner. Joseph, but you can't make a cutoff latency higher than 1,000 milliseconds. You can. It's customizable. It's a blank field now. Can we use QoS on VPN SpeedFusion? Yep, that's where the subtunnels come into play here, and then you can assign rules accordingly. Is there a hardware and software roadmap published? The form is going to be your best point to keep an eye on that. How can device get online and in control to based on the serial number? Well, it's got to be online, and then if it is a valid serial number not registered to another account, you are able to get it online that way, as long as it has that outbound communication, of course. What is the lowest hardware version version 8 will support? I do believe we have a checklist up in the form, but in essence, current hardware revisions. In control mode is cloud platform by Peplink. Can we integrate a personalized in control mode on a specific data center? Fusion Hub. We do have Fusion Hub instances that you can deploy to keep for the more security minded. Can you list out all the QAs in the slide with the answers? I won't promise. Benjamin, what are the hardware requirements for a Fusion Hub solo? If you head over to the site, like I said, under Fusion, you'll see them there. It kind of depends on how, it's 100 meg throughput bidirectional. It's a 1-peer connection. And then it depends on, as far, we do have some baseline specs up on the site regarding what you would install on. Andy, missed the beginning, recorded, you bet, sir. The recording will be available. Lynn, what effective performance can be expected on a 4-WAN HD4 bonded SpeedFusion implementation? As we were talking about, kind of that less 19% off of the top to get you a base number of each of the WAN connections, and of course depends on what we're bonding against on the back end. What about jumbo frames larger than 1500? Well, again, SpeedFusion adds 80 bytes regardless. That's what we add. That is a constant you can work around. Practice, again, up on the site. What is the markup point to pass the PCE exams? I believe it is 70%. Caleb, can a link for the slides be emailed? I don't know if it's going to be emailed, but it should be up on the form if nothing else. VPN and SpeedFusion, virtual IP needs to be set up in IC2 or individually. I believe believe that, when the feature launched, it was individually. I think you can do it through IC2 now. I'd have to test. Can you set up a DDNS in Fusion Hub Cloud server? It would be within in Control 2 that you would set it up. Can we get the virtual Peplink for demo internal testing? Again, Fusion Hub Solo and as well as a 30-day demo version are both available on the website. Go ahead and grab, absolutely free. Is SpeedFusion product with a very transparent model of licensing? Well, SpeedFusion is a feature, not really a product in and of itself. It's part and parcel with the gear. So, I mean, that will, that's kind of where you got to look at it. You buy the box, you get SpeedFusion access. James, how does this solution save money if each site needs a Peplink plus SpeedFusion license plus 2 SIP connections minimum? Well, you don't need a SpeedFusion license if you buy one of the bigger boxes. And again, what where you start to save money is rather than negotiating high SLA contracts with like MPLS, fiber, or the like, you can start to bond together multiple consumer-grade connections, cable modem, DSL, what have you, and get something greater than the sum of its parts. Gaddison, can I know where is the questions for SpeedFusion, or excuse me, for the PCE? Those, no. I mean, that's kind of going where we're talking about. I need to ask about the practice exam. Minimum is, I believe, a 70. Oh, how can I get the presentation? It will be mailed out afterwards. John, thanks. Go next week for round 2. Appreciate it. Firmware 8 will be with hardware version 6. Must be talking about the Balance 380. The 6, I believe, is the latest. That should work. Both of the links are the demos, maxdemo.peplink.com and balancedemo.peplink.com require credentials. Where can we reacquire them? They were on the previous page. Just admin. Fusion Hub image, peplink.com, products, Fusion Hub. Joseph, in working with satellite connections, is there an option of working with greater than 1,000 millisecond cutoff? Again, it's completely definable. Lucio, are you doing agreement with Italian carrier for 5G? At the moment, it's not more than possible to buy flat hour connections like that in the past, and since the cost of bounding a 4x5 is expensive. There are always deals in play here. I don't have a direct answer for it, but reach out to your point of sale and we can, to find out more as far as local requirements. Anonymous, can you set up QoS depending on the destination IP rather than user groups or application? If we are talking straight up outbound policy, well, I mean, if we're talking SpeedFusion, the outbound policy rules on the subtunnel is assuming the other endpoint. So, I mean, it would be, you certainly should be able to. Need to pass live video via 4G bonding to a gig fiber. What's the best products to use with throughput around 3 megs? Well, again, you're going to need them on both sides. Out in the field, 4G bonding, I would probably do an HD4. Just to make sure you got the horsepower under the hood, and then back at the studio location, you could probably get away with like a Balance 1, Balance 210, depending on your connections. All right, guys, I think we got through everything. I absolutely appreciate you sticking through this whole thing. Remember, next week, 1 week from today, we will do the second half of the PCE exam, product families and in Control 2. If you have any other questions, the form.peplink.com, as well as any of the social media channels, we're here to help out. We'll get you taken care of, and we want to get you certified and knowledgeable with the gear. We're excited to bring everybody in. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week.